we are looking at educational policies, and I'm going to do this in more than one part because I'll look at each one and evaluate them as we go along. So the first big piece of educational policy occurred in 1944. This was called the Butler Act. And they introduced the first time this national test that all students had to do, which was called the 11 plus. Now with the 11 plus, every student sat some aptitude tests based on English, a little bit of maths, and the results of this test determined what school that they were going to go to. So if you passed this test, you were deemed academic, you went to a grammar school, whereas if you failed, you were more likely to go to a secondary modern, because you weren't deemed academic enough. Now, in some areas, they had a third type, which was called a technical school. So because of this test and whether you were going to go to three types of schools, it was called the tripartite system. Now, if you wanted to apply a little bit of theory here, this is an example of something that is meritocratic, that every student sat the same test, they all had the same opportunity, and it links a little bit more to functionalists because you were being sifted and sorted. There was a little bit of role allocation going on, determining your path was based on how well you did on these tests. And this is the first time we saw something called selection by ability, and this has actually appeared as a 4-mark question in 2019, and this provides us with some really useful evaluation points for this policy. So firstly, it reproduced class inequality. The children that were best able to pass this test were the middle class students who had the cultural capital. They were used to answering questions and doing puzzles like what was on the 11 plus test. But also girls were at a disadvantage as well. They had to score higher in order to pass to get into a grammar school. And secondly, there was a massive amount of stigma that was attached to the students that did not pass the 11 plus. There was a lot of prestige. If you did pass and go to a grammar school, you were held in high status, whereas if you didn't, you were labelled as a failure. Now, I mentioned before that this type of question did appear in 2019, and here is the mark scheme for it, the problems of schools selecting by ability, and there are some further evaluation points which would be really useful if you did get an essay question about these types of policies. So why is this really useful for us? So you could be asked a question such as evaluate the extent to which educational policies reproduce inequality within society, and this is where you can go right back to this policy in 1944 to start your arguments and your evidence to support the way that this policy did reproduce both class and gender inequality.